The cafe was alive with chatter. People sat in cozy corners, sipping their coffee, exchanging stories, and enjoying the morning. But in one corner, a tense silence stood out. The manager, dressed sharply in his early 40s, glared across the table. His arms were crossed in disapproval, and his eyes seemed to burn with judgment. On the other side of the table sat a young woman, her face tired, and her clothes faded from too many long shifts. She had just placed a steaming tray of coffee down in front of him. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, but it didn't seem to reach him. "Do you think we hire people like you here?" He scoffed, loud enough for others to hear. "Get out, and don't come back." The words stung. She felt her hands shake, but she didn't argue. With a rush of heat on her face, she quietly gathered her things. She didn't say a word as she picked up her bag and walked toward the door, the bell above it ringing softly as it swung closed behind her. Little did the manager know, this moment was far from the last time he'd see her. What seemed like just another exchange between a tired worker and an impatient boss was about to set in motion, a twist neither of them could have predicted. Who was this woman, really? And how would her quiet exit from that cafe turn into a moment of reckoning for the man who thought he could dismiss her so easily? What started as a simple, everyday interaction would soon show just how quickly things can change when we least expect it. Stay with us, because life often has a way of surprising us when we think we've got everything figured out. Sarah was no stranger to hard work. At 28, she had seen more than her fair share of struggle. Growing up in a small town with limited opportunities, Sarah watched her mother work long hours just to keep food on the table. Her mom was the kind of woman who never gave up, no matter how tough things got. And that's the kind of woman Sarah aspired to be. After high school, Sarah set out for something more. She dreamed of becoming a businesswoman, a person who could create jobs and opportunities for others just like her. She managed to save enough money to attend community college, balancing classes with part-time work to make ends meet. For a while, it seemed like her hard work was paying off, but life doesn't always go according to plan. When her mom became seriously ill, Sarah had no choice but to drop out of school and care for her. The medical bills were overwhelming, and Sarah worked whatever jobs she could just to keep their lights on. After her mom passed away, Sarah was left with a mountain of debt and a heart full of grief. She didn't give up though. She knew her mom would want her to keep pushing forward. Now Sarah was living in the city, struggling to make rent in a tiny apartment. By day, she worked as a temp secretary, answering phones and filing papers. By night, she cleaned offices and restaurants, scrubbing floors while the world around her slept. The work was exhausting, but she had learned long ago that giving up wasn't an option. Her mornings were the toughest part. The alarm would go off at 4 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep. The apartment was cold. She couldn't afford to keep the heat on all night, so she bundled up in layers. The smell of instant coffee filled the small space as she brewed what was, at that moment, her only indulgence. The walk to the bus stop in winter was brutal. The cold nipped at her fingers, but Sarah kept moving. Through it all, she held on to the words her mother had always said. You can't control the world, but you can control how you show up in it. Sarah still dreamed of starting her own business. She jotted down ideas for a small cafe or a food truck serving affordable meals to neighborhoods like the one she grew up in. But for now, survival was all that mattered. Despite her challenges, Sarah never let herself grow bitter. She was the type of person who offered her seat to an elderly passenger on the bus or stayed late to help a colleague at work. Her kindness was her constant companion, though it wasn't always returned. People like the cafe manager, the one who had humiliated her that morning, saw her as someone beneath them, someone whose value was determined by what she wore or how she looked. That day at the cafe had been a hard blow. She had applied for a server position, hoping the tips could help her save a little faster. But instead of being treated with respect, she was dismissed with cruel words. She left the cafe feeling invisible, as if her worth had been erased in an instant. But as she stepped into the cold, her heart heavy with frustration, Sarah made herself a promise. She would never let anyone make her feel small again. She didn't know how or when, but she was determined to prove that her worth wasn't defined by the judgments of others. What Sarah didn't know in that moment was that her quiet strength, The very thing that had kept her going through all the hardships was about to change her life, and the life of the man who had dismissed her so easily. It was a rainy evening when Sarah's shift ended, and she stepped out into the cold, wet streets. The city was a blur of neon lights, their reflections rippling in puddles on the pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around her, clutching her umbrella as the wind whipped through the air. It had been a long day. She was tired, but the bus ride home was only a few minutes away. As she approached the bus stop, she noticed an elderly man standing ahead of her. His coat was threadbare, barely offering him any warmth. He held a plastic bag filled with belongings that looked like they might be all he had left. Sarah's eyes softened. She was no stranger to hardship, and something about seeing him made her heart ache. Her own coat wasn't much better, but at least it was warm enough. The bus pulled up, and as the man shuffled toward it, his bag tore. A blanket, a pair of worn shoes, and a can of soup spilled onto the wet pavement. The other passengers watched but did nothing. Without hesitating, Sarah moved forward. "Here, let me help you," she said, kneeling to gather his belongings. She handed him the blanket and carefully folded the torn bag. "Are you getting on or not?" the driver called impatiently. "Just a minute," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm as she helped the man up the steps. When they reached the door, Sarah saw the man fumble for his fare, only to realize he didn't have enough. Without thinking, she reached into her pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and handed them to the driver. "Thank you," the man said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah guided him to an empty seat and sat down beside him. She could tell he was grateful, but there was still a sadness in his eyes. "Where are you headed?" she asked gently. "Shelter on Fifth Avenue," he replied, his voice tinged with doubt. "But I don't think they'll let me in this late." Sarah knew exactly which shelter he was talking about. It was one of the few places that offered a safe haven for people in need, but it had strict rules. If you didn't make it before curfew, they wouldn't let you in. She thought for a moment, then made a decision. When the bus pulled up to her stop, she stood up. "Come on," she said, turning to the man. "What?" he asked, surprised. "You can stay at my place tonight," Sarah said. "It's small, but it's warm, and you can get some rest." He hesitated, his pride clearly at war with his need. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," Sarah replied with a small smile. "I'm offering." At her apartment, she made him a cup of tea and heated up the last of her soup. She gave him her only spare blanket and made sure he was comfortable. The man's gratitude was overwhelming, but Sarah shrugged it off. "You do the same for someone else," she said, downplaying the act. As he ate, the man told her a little about his life. Years of hard work, only to be undone by a series of bad breaks and mounting medical bills. His story resonated deeply with Sarah, reminding her of the struggles she faced. The next morning, Sarah woke early and walked the man to the shelter, ensuring he would have a place to stay. He thanked her repeatedly, his voice thick with emotion, promising he would never forget her kindness. To Sarah, it was just a small act, something anyone should do. But for the man, it was a lifeline. What she didn't know was that someone had witnessed the entire exchange from a distance. The cafe manager, who had humiliated her only days before, had been out for a late coffee run. He watched as Sarah selflessly helped the elderly man, offering her time and kindness without asking for anything in return. Something about what he saw that night stirred something deep within him. It was a moment that would later make him question his previous judgment of Sarah and of people like her. As he replayed the scene in his mind, the image of Sarah's quiet strength lingered. She wasn't just the woman he dismissed in the cafe. She was someone who, despite her own struggles, still found the capacity to care for others. And that realization, though subtle, would change his perspective forever. A surprising change. A week had passed since Sarah helped the elderly man at the bus stop. Her life had returned to its usual rhythm, long shifts at the cafe, stretching every dollar to make rent, and keeping her tiny apartment in working order. But one evening, everything changed. It was a busy night at the cafe, with customers lining up for coffee and pastries. Sarah was cleaning tables near the counter when the cafe manager, Mr. Clark, called her into his office. His tone was calm, almost kind, which immediately felt different from his usual no-nonsense demeanor. "Sarah, can you spare a minute?" he asked, motioning toward the small office in the back. Her stomach dropped. What was this about? She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to shake off the anxiety creeping in. "Of course," she replied, stepping inside. Mr. Clark handed her a folded piece of paper. For a split second, Sarah's heart raced. Was this a termination notice? She couldn't afford to lose this job. But as she unfolded the paper, she was stunned. It wasn't a letter, it was a paycheck, far larger than anything she'd ever received. Her mind raced to understand why. And before she could speak, Mr. Clark explained. "I saw you last week," he began, leaning back in his chair, "at the bus stop, helping that man. I've never seen anyone go out of their way like that, especially someone who doesn't have much themselves." Sarah's cheeks flushed, unsure of how to respond. "It wasn't a big deal," she muttered, looking down at the check in her hands. "It was," Mr. Clark said firmly. "I've been running this cafe for years, and I've judged people too quickly. Customers, even employees. Watching you reminded me there's so much I don't know about someone's life." He paused, his expression serious but warm. "I want to do something to help you. This bonus is just the start. There's an assistant manager position opening up, and I want you to take it." Sarah blinked, still processing his words. "Me? Assistant manager?" "Yes," Mr. Clark confirmed. "You've been here for years. You're hardworking, reliable, and frankly, you've earned it." "But I don't have the qualifications," Sarah stammered, her mind spinning. "You have the heart," he said with a smile. "The rest, you can learn." The weight of the moment settled on her. A promotion, a significant raise, steady hours. It was more than she could have hoped for. She thought of her mountain of bills, the dreams she'd put on hold, and the exhaustion she'd been living with. The promotion felt like a lifeline. Overwhelmed, Sarah could only nod. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. But the surprises didn't stop there. The very next day, Sarah was still reeling from the news when a stranger walked into the cafe. He was well-dressed, with a confident smile. He approached Sarah with a warm handshake. "Are you Sarah?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, a little cautious. "I'm Ethan Brooks. I work with the shelter on 5th Avenue. You helped one of our residents last week." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The elderly man she had helped. "How is he?" she asked eagerly. "Better, thanks to you," Ethan said. "Your kindness gave him more than just shelter. It gave him hope. He shared your story with everyone at the shelter, and now it's inspiring the whole place." Ethan handed her a small envelope. "This is from him, and from us, a token of gratitude." Sarah opened the envelope, finding a handwritten note from the elderly man. He thanked her for not just offering shelter, but for giving him a second chance at life. Along with the note was a gift card for a local grocery store and a voucher for free career training sessions at a nearby center. "Your act of kindness has a ripple effect, Sarah," Ethan said with a smile. "Never underestimate its power." As he walked out, Sarah stood still, holding the envelope in her hands. Her life had turned upside down in just a week. She had a promotion, a chance for career growth, and a reminder that her small actions had far-reaching effects. What she didn't realize was that these unexpected moments were only the beginning of a bigger transformation. She had no idea how much this new chapter would change her future. A journey of change and transformation. As the weeks went by, Sarah noticed subtle yet powerful changes in her life. The promotion to assistant manager brought a stability she hadn't known in years. For the first time in ages, she didn't have to worry about scrambling for extra shifts. With steady hours and a better paycheck, her financial stress began to ease. Taking on new challenges. Her new role at the cafe wasn't without its challenges. Managing inventory, handling customer complaints, and keeping everything running smoothly was no small task. But Sarah embraced it all. The responsibilities pushed her out of her comfort zone, but she was determined to prove herself, not just to Mr. Clark, but to herself. Every day, she gave it her all. She remembered Mr. Clark's words, "You have the heart." That belief in herself gave her the drive to learn the rest. Slowly, She became more confident, not just as a worker, but as someone who could make a real difference. The unexpected gift of education. The training sessions from the shelter were another unexpected gift. After work, Sarah attended career development courses, learning new skills that opened up new possibilities. She had never imagined she could find time for anything beyond survival, but now she saw that a better future was within reach. A powerful message from home. One evening, after closing the cafe, Sarah checked her phone. She had a message from her mom, one she hadn't heard from in a while. Her heart swelled when she read the words, "I'm so proud of you, honey. Your kindness, your strength, you're changing the world, one step at a time. Don't stop now." For years, Sarah had relied on her mom for support, but these words felt different. They carried weight now. This wasn't just about scraping by anymore. Sarah was rebuilding her life, and she was starting to thrive. The ripple effect of kindness. It wasn't just her family that noticed. At the cafe, customers could see the change in Sarah too. One regular, Jenna, noticed it first. "You seem different lately," Jenna remarked, stirring her coffee one morning. "Happier, maybe?" Sarah smiled, surprised by the comment. "I guess I am. I've learned that small acts of kindness can change everything." Jenna smiled back, her eyes thoughtful. "I've been going through a tough time too. Your story made me reach out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. You forget sometimes how much one person can mean to someone else." In that moment, Sarah realized just how far her kindness had gone. It had started with a simple act of helping a stranger, but it had created a ripple that touched others in unexpected ways. A heartfelt thank you. Not long after, the elderly man from the shelter came by the cafe. He was walking slowly, but with a smile that told Sarah how far he had come. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "you saved my life. I won't forget that." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "I just did what anyone would do," she said, her voice a little shaky. "You've taught me something too. It's never too late to change." A new chapter of leadership. Over the following months, Sarah grew into her role at the cafe. She helped turn it into more than just a place to grab coffee. It became a community hub. She organized charity events and partnered with local organizations to give back. The shy, unsure woman who had once been struggling to survive had transformed into a confident leader who was making a real difference. Her transformation wasn't just about climbing the career ladder or gaining financial stability. It was about understanding the power of kindness and how a single act could change someone's life. From Mr. Clark to her mom, the elderly man to Jenna, Sarah saw how interconnected their lives had become because of one simple gesture. Looking forward, as Sarah locked up the cafe late one evening, she paused to reflect. She had come so far, no longer just a woman struggling to keep going, but someone who helped others find their way. She smiled, knowing that this journey of transformation had only just begun. Whatever came next, Sarah was ready to face it with the same strength, kindness, and determination that had gotten her this far, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The power of kindness. A lesson in transformation. Sarah's story teaches us something vital. Even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect that leads to unexpected and profound changes. From struggling to make ends meet to becoming a source of inspiration for others, Sarah's journey proves that selflessness, perseverance, and hope have the power to transform lives, not just the ones we help, but our own as well. The impact of one action. Think about it. Sarah didn't set out to change her life when she helped the elderly man. She simply saw someone in need and offered a hand. Yet, that one simple gesture set off a chain of events that shifted her reality completely. It made her more than just a cafe worker. It made her a leader, someone who inspired others and helped create positive change. Could your own actions spark a similar transformation? It doesn't have to be grand or complicated. Sometimes, it's the smallest act that has the biggest impact. Whether it's listening to someone who's struggling, helping a colleague, or just offering a word of encouragement, these moments matter. Your opportunity to make a difference. So, what can we take away from Sarah's story? How can we be the ones to create change? whether in someone else's life or our own. When was the last time you helped someone, even in a small way, and saw how much it meant to them? Could you be the spark that ignites someone's transformation, just like Sarah did for that elderly man? Take a moment to reflect. What would happen if you decided to act with kindness today? How could your small gesture make a lasting difference? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments how kindness has made an impact in your life or in someone else's. Let's keep the cycle going. If Sarah's story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who could use a bit of inspiration today. By sharing these stories, we create a world where kindness is the norm, not the exception. Remember, every small act of kindness can lead to something bigger. Let's continue spreading goodness, one person at a time. Together, we can make a real difference.